today. And just before we start our program, our training today, I'd like to open up with prayer. So wherever you are, may you join me in prayer, please. Father, we thank you for this wonderful opportunity, bringing us all together for this training. We are very thankful for this blessing because it is a golden opportunity for us to learn from experts and specialists. And so we are very grateful. And we thank you for giving us this knowledge because you are the only source of knowledge and wisdom. And so we are thankful. Thank you for our trainers today. May you bless them, that they continue to be a blessing to many more ESS practitioners out there. And also thank you for our participants today. May you help us open up our minds and our hearts to receive this learning so that we can use it to bless our countries and our people. And so we thank you for this opportunity. We give you all the glory. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. All right. With that, let me introduce our module today. Our module today is titled Grievance Redress Mechanism, a case study from the Pacific. What is the narrative behind this module? In our training plan, it is I'll just read from here. Following the previous PLP-ESS training on Module 8 for grievance redress mechanisms and reporting, this module will focus on the structure of an existing project GRM and will explain the key parts that guide the implementation of the GRM. This includes roles and responsibilities of the project grievance management, grievance procedure, and monitoring and reporting. Participants will also be introduced to the following templates: complaint form, grievance closeout form, and corrective action record. So our learning objective for this module aims to, 1, introduce participants to the structure of a project-specific GRM, learning about the roles and responsibilities between the National Implementing Agency, Project Management Unit, and contractor. 2, introduce participants to a project-specific grievance procedure and individuals or organizations with responsibilities in the effective administration of the following steps. 1, receive, register, and acknowledge the grievance. 2, screen and assess. 3, review grievance. 4, identify solutions. 5, implement corrective actions. 6, inform the complainant once the resolution is implemented. Monitor, document, and close out. And then the third objective is introduce participants to GRM tools such as complaint form, grievance closeout form, and corrective action record. And so that is our module for today. And introducing our trainers, Mr. Tom Callender. He is the social development specialist at World Bank Group. And Tom is an environmental and social specialist with over 15 years experience working in Australia and across Asia and the Pacific. And so Tom has extensive experience working with project developers, financiers, and governments to strengthen environmental and social outcomes of public and private development projects in the energy, water, transportation, mining, agroforestry, tourism, disaster management, and community development sectors. Tom has worked on the ground in following countries: Australia, Cambodia, China, England, India, Indonesia, Kiribati, Laos, Myanmar, PNG, Philippines, Rwanda, Samoa, Sri Lanka, Tonga, Thailand, and Vietnam. That's on his LinkedIn page. And if you are interested to find out more about Tom. And then assisting Tom today is Miss Rachel Marber, Senior Social Development Specialist at the World Bank Group. And we all are familiar with Miss Rachel from our round 1 and round 2 trainings, and she specializes in social risk management, corporate responsibility, impact assessment, resettlement, fiscal and economic, stakeholder engagement, team and project manager. And so that's just a brief introduction of our trainers today, and they are fantastic trainers, and we're looking forward to hearing from them. But before I hand it over to Tom and Rachel, just a reminder for our participants, please remember that all the training materials and our videos are uploaded on the PNEA portal, and that is free access. You can access that information freely. Please register if you're not registered so that you can log in and get that information. And also remember, this is very important, that you fill in our online evaluation survey form. This is very important so that we can get an idea of what you've learned from each module, and that will build and support any further future training programs for our Pacific ESS practitioners. And also remember to stay until the end of the session, because the time that you are logged in for this session is recorded, and that will also ensure that you get your certificate after the after each module. And so that is those are our reminders, everyone. And now I'll hand it over to our trainers. Enjoy your session today, and make sure you can type your questions in our chat box, or just raise your hand if you have a question. Dr. Tyler.
Thanks, Farah, and thank you for that lovely introduction. At least I know one person has read my LinkedIn profile. Yes, so today it doesn't look like it, but Rach is also with me in the room. There's a nice profile shot of myself. We're working on 2 different computers, but hopefully we can make this all work. I'll be leading today's discussion, and Rach will be coming in with comments and sort of some of her experiences. And we also welcome you also to do the same. Share presentation.
Tom, hi Tom, sorry, we can't really hear you. Can you please check your audio?
You can hear me though, yeah? No?
We can hear you, but the volume is a little low.
We can hear you, but your volume is low.
Yeah, no,
sorry, Tom, can you try?
I'm just going to go to audio settings and just make sure everything is on full, which it is.
If you can you try Rachel's? If Rachel has a computer, can you try?
Just wait, is that better?
Yes,
okay,
that's
yes,
very good.
Okay. Well, maybe does that sound okay?
Yes. Yes. Now we can hear you well.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, Tom. You can start again.
Done. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll start again. Thanks, Safira, for that lovely introduction. And I'll make the joke again. It was great that one person has read my LinkedIn profile. It is pretty detailed and probably a little bit outdated. But yeah, that's right. I'm a social development specialist, and I work in the Pacific team, and I work across a number of countries, Papua New Guinea, Tonga and Samoa. And with me today, I have Rach, who is the coordinator of the Pacific social risk team. And as you can see, we're on different computers, but I assure you we're in the same room. We're having a few technical issues. Hopefully we'll get through this without too many more. So can you all see the presentation? Afira, can you see that clearly now? Yep.
Yes, yeah, you can see it, Tom.
Great, great. All right, so today's session focuses on how projects can effectively manage project-related complaints and grievances, and in doing so, seek to avoid and minimise negative impacts on projects or the environment, and more broadly, ensure the success of the project. Most of you would have already had first-hand experience in designing and implementing GRMs and have seen the gaps and the challenges and the opportunities for doing this better. So this is where we really want to pick up on today. And Afira sort of gave you a bit of a rundown of the objectives of today's session. What I've done is really utilize a lot of the previous session we did on the GRM. So it sort of gives you a little bit of a refresher on that. And then the second part of this session today will be on the case study. We've got a number of case studies that we'll just talk through, because I think last time when we did this session, we ran out of time. We couldn't talk to them in detail. And some of those projects, I've just sort of looked at the participant list and I see there's a number of people that are joining from those projects. So it'd be great for them to chime in when we get to the case study section. But as you can see, the learning objectives today are to describe to be able to describe the grievance redress mechanism requirements for World Bank finance projects, to communicate why project GRMs are important, and to outline the key elements for developing and implementing a robust project GRM, and to be able to apply this in the work that you're doing. Next slide. So we want you all to really actively participate in this session. The more that we hear from you, the better. So please try and use the functions that Zoom has. So we have a reaction function there, so you can give a round of applause when you think Rachel or I have done well, or you can give a thumbs up if you want to agree with something that we said, or perhaps you don't agree and you want to find the thumbs down button. That's a little bit hard. Made that a little bit harder to find, but if you really want to give a thumbs down, have a look for it and throw it to the conversation. So perhaps we can test it out. Can everyone try and find the thumbs up button and just thumbs up? I'll do it, or maybe can I do it? I can't find it.
Did you find it, Tom?
No, I can't. Oh, there we go. Reactions.
Reactions.
Yeah. So I don't know if that, yeah, that thumbs up comes up on the screen and then it disappears. Okay. So in that same reaction section, you also have a place to raise your hand. So if you do want to contribute to this discussion orally, then yeah, just raise your hand. Afira will see it, or Rachel see it, and let me know when you want to come in. The other function there is the chat function. You're all really familiar with that. I've seen you contributing lots in previous sessions, but just a reminder to use that chat function as we go. It's good. It's a good place just to put your reactions to some of the stuff that we're saying, or share some examples. So we really encourage you to do that. And we've got Afira and Rach sort of managing that chat line too. So perhaps we can test that out. If everyone would like to just perhaps, well, your name's already there, so perhaps just write the country that you're dialing in from in the chat line. Okay, so we've got FSM, Samoa, Fiji, New Zealand, Tonga, Kiribati, PNG, Seoul, Sydney. Great. Okay, so we've got lots of people dialing in from lots of different places. So it's great that that you could all join us today, and hopefully internet connections and those kinds of things hold up and we can get through today's session. Okay. So let's get into it. Firstly, I'll do a bit of an introduction to the World Bank's environmental and social framework. As you know, it outlines a number of ways in which stakeholders can raise complaints and grievances relating to the World Bank funds projects. Rach has already given it away. But I was going to ask you what kind of mechanisms there are, but you can see that on the screen now. There's three mechanisms that can be used, or three ways in which a project affected person or beneficiary can raise a grievance about a bank financed project. The first there is project level, and that's what we're really going to be discussing today. The second is the World Bank's own grievance redress service. So anyone can submit a grievance to us, and then we need to actively also manage the resolution of that grievance along with our client and relevant stakeholders. And then finally, there's a inspection panel, and that's an avenue that a complainant can pursue if they've previously brought up a complaint to the attention of the bank and they're not satisfied with the outcome. So they're sort of three areas or three ways in which a complainant can raise a grievance. But today we'll really focus on the first one. The ESF, ESS 10 really is where, or Environmental and Social Standard 10 is where the requirement for a borrower to establish and operate a grievance redress mechanism is. And so that requirement is there, and it also provides some guidance on what how that mechanism should look and how it should operate. It requires the GRM to be proportionate to the risks and impacts of the project, to be accessible and inclusive, so that everyone knows about it and can access it. It requires the GRM to be culturally appropriate, so make sure that it responds to the needs of the communities that the project's being implemented in. It also needs to be discreet and and confidential, and also allow for anonymity and ensure prompt and effective resolution. So those are the sort of key things that a GRM needs to do that are outlined in ESS 10, and there's a bit of a guidance in that standard too. You can see on this screen, there's a number of other standards that mention the GRM. And so if you're implementing a project with resettlement impacts and ESS 5 is relevant, then there's clauses in there in terms of the GRM. And similarly, if you're implementing a project that where the ESS 7 on Indigenous peoples is relevant, then there's also requirements on how the GRM should function to cater for those specific needs of Indigenous peoples. And finally, I don't know how to. And finally, there's also a GRM requirements in ESS 2, which is on labour and working conditions. That's actually a separate GRM, though it's still something that the project has to put in place. It's not something that we're going to talk about today, but just wanted to highlight that there is this other, what we call a worker GRM, which needs to be established so project workers, whether they be people from the PMUs or people from the contractors workforce, can access a mechanism that's designed to receive and resolve worker specific grievances. There's lots of other institutions that have similar requirements. You can see there from ADB, IFC, DFAT, And a lot of governments also have requirements for complaints management that are set out in various legislation, like environmental and social assessment and approvals legislation. And so these should also be considered and incorporated into project GRMs as well. Just a quick quiz, perhaps use the chat line there. Question, a project GRM should be put in place by the borrower to receive, evaluate and address all grievances in communities where the project is being implemented. True or false? Can you put true or false in the chat line? We've got a true from Wendy. True. True from everyone. Great. Well, actually, it's a bit of a trick question. The answer is false. Oh, we got Rainy. You win the prize.
Oh, Rainy, yes.
Yeah, it is true. Sorry, it is false. The project GRM should only deal with grievances that are related to the project. In a community, there may be lots of grievances about lots of different things that are happening in the community, and the community often has its own ways of dealing with those grievances. But for a project GRM, it really needs to only deal with those project-related grievances, and that's a really important thing. The first thing that projects need to do when they do receive a grievance is work out, is this related to the project? And if it is, it continues through the process. If it's not, then the person receiving that grievance needs to sort of work out who they can forward that grievance to so that person can get that grievance resolved through the relevant system outside the project. Stop there. Rach, did you have any sort of things to come in on that first bit before we move on?
Look, nothing particular to add, Tom. Can I just check that you can hear me okay? We're working off one microphone. Is that?
Yes, we can hear you, Rach.
Look, nothing really to add, but I do think that's it's a cruel question to start with, but it is a good one because, you know, when you are working with projects, you know, there's all kinds of problems in communities that, you know, are normal in our own communities, our own streets, our own neighborhoods. There's all kinds of issues going on. But for you working on a project, it is really important to recognize, you know, as soon as you receive a grievance, what it's related to. And for the most part, it will be related to the project. That's why people have come to you. But there is other kinds of grievances that people may raise where it's not quite clear. And that's your first sort of port of call. I think the only thing I'd probably say, Tom, is, you know, if it's not clear, presume that it is project related, until you realize that it's not, just because there's probably, often you might get combinations of things where some of it might be a complaint about the project and it leads into other things. So go through the process as much as you can before you dismiss it, because you are learning through that whole process about things that people care about. And so it's still a useful exercise and useful information for you. So I guess that's the only thing I'd sort of raise at this stage.
Yeah, that's right. Often it's not clear, and it takes a lot of investigation and to go through that process to understand what the grievance is really about and whether it is related or not.
Yeah. Wendy has.
Yes, Wendy has a question, please.
I just wanted to say that there's an example in the Solomons which makes this question dubious. The example is that in a particular project, there was problems getting an easement through a church property. And it took ages to find out, but eventually the church property just kept saying no. Eventually they found out they had a grievance about something that was done years before in a completely different project or initiative that hadn't gone well. And so they were refusing to cooperate with the current project. So it was a grievance in the community, but it wasn't to do with the project at all. It was to do with something that had happened a long time ago, but it had to be sorted before it could be, this project could go ahead.
Yeah, that's a really good example. I think in that case, it shows that there are other things that are happening in the community that can impact the project and impact the project's ability to get access to things and to run smoothly. However, it's not a grievance specific to the project that the project could resolve by itself, but because it was so important to the project, that access, that easement was required, that maybe there was few other options, then the project took it upon itself to work with those involved to get that sorted, so that person would then be happy to provide the easement.
That's a great example. Thanks, Wendy. Those legacy issues can be tricky ones. It could also be on the same project. If you have a long-term project where things haven't quite gone to plan in one part of the project, it may affect how you act sort of down the line, and it may lead you to have a bit of extra effort. So it's a really good example of why closing out grievances, really understanding what the problem is and being able to sort of address them, or feel like allow the person who's raised the grievance to at least feel like the process has been followed, and to have information that either resolves it for them or they understand the process and their future options, so that that those kinds of issues don't sort of affect us, further down the line. But it's not always straightforward to understand if that's going to happen. So it's a really good point to raise, Wendy, because it's quite possible, and it may take you back a little bit before you're able to move forward. So thanks for sharing that example.
Thanks, Rach. I hope that was okay, Wendy. You've still got your hand up, so I think you have to click your hand down if you're. That's great. Perfect. Okay, so what's a project GRM? Also, it's a process for receiving, evaluating and addressing project-related grievances from affected communities or stakeholders at the level of the community or project, region or country. So it really can be quite broad in terms of the different stakeholders and being able to access this mechanism to raise a complaint. The purpose is to increase participation of beneficiaries. Raising a grievance is a way of participating, and it may help different people or groups gain a better understanding of the process by doing so. The purpose is also to minimise adverse impacts. And so, finding out about complaints and grievances early can really help the project resolve them quickly and stop them becoming sort of bigger issues that could be an issue that could lead to the next point, which is the issue of project delays. So, managing grievances effectively can really help the project to avoid those types of delays. And finally, the purpose is to ensure that projects can achieve their objectives. And grievances can really help a project understand what is working on the project and what's not. For instance, for a road project, it may be that there's a few grievances about the different safety features that are being put in place, and by getting the grievances on that, then there's an opportunity to engage further with the community on how those safety features might work better. Okay, next slide. There's all different types of project grievances, and it really depends on the nature and scale of the risks associated with the project activities. So, you know, for a road construction project, you obviously have, you may have grievances really related to land or assets or road safety. For an agricultural project with grant schemes, you might have issues concerning equity or fairness around the allocation of grants. For a school rehabilitation project, you might have, you know, issues with the construction at the school, and at the same time classes are going on, or complaints are, about that, and you know, the proximity to children and the issues that come with that. So I guess it's really important to understand the type of project and the type of risks and the kinds of grievances that you expect you could receive. Often we have projects that don't receive many grievances, and even the ones that do, there's the risk that sections of the community might not feel comfortable or feel able to raise a complaint, and particularly with you know, vulnerable groups and people that are disadvantaged groups within a community. So I thought it would be good, and I know we did this last time, but it was a while ago. Perhaps we could just brainstorm in the chat about the kinds of things that might make it hard, or that are barriers for vulnerable and disadvantaged groups to make complaints. What are the kinds of things that could prevent them from doing that? Okay, relatives. Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, within a small community.
It's very true here in Samoa.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and Fiona, that's interesting. You say the whole of Samoa, because in a smaller country with you know, everyone connected, everyone knows each other. Those kinds of issues can really come to the fore. But also, you know, just within a community, and you know, the community dynamics can really prevent people from making complaints. Language, yeah, that's a really good one. So, you know, it's no good if the grievance mechanisms and the consultations that you're doing are in one language, and a group of people in the community don't speak that language. Rach, feel free to jump in because there's lots coming through.
We've got a lot coming through. This length of time to address.
These are excellent.
Then there's one from Marista.
Unaware of the process.
Accessibility issues. Village Council, there's fear the project will stop, from Wendy. Royini says unaware of the proper GRM process. Dontien says accessibility. Malachi says lack of acceptance from the communities due to their vulnerability or standing in the community. PJ says interconnectedness. Jennifer Krimbu, unaware that GRM exists. Rach says only online but limited access to internet. Very true. Marista says feeling of unworthiness or inferiority. Kisa says complacency. There's one about the judiciary system takes forever. All good answers.
I really like the one. Sorry to interrupt, Afira. I just wanted to pick on the one that, apologies, I've lost it in the great flood of comments, which is great, but about the inferiority or not wanting to rock the boat, because some people feel like the issue is not significant enough, or their position means that they might not be listened to, or they don't feel they can explain it well enough, or they don't feel like that it will be addressed. And I think a lot of us kind of think, oh, I just can't be bothered. I'm annoyed, but I can't be bothered. And so I feel like I understand that for myself. If I have a complaint about like my telephone company, for example, it's going to take too long. I'm going to be on hold. I can't be bothered. I'd rather put up with it. But what that stops anybody doing when you don't do that, or you don't choose to raise that grievance, is it stops you making improvements. So you want to design your system so that those kinds of things, people recognize that they can come forward anyway, that they will be heard, that there is a process, and that, you know, they will receive something from doing that. It might not absolutely be what they want, but it will be sort of something. And you really want to design in a way that starts to remove some of these barriers, so that, you know, people do bring you, even if it is a minor complaint, even in the end, it is quite small, still useful information for you in terms of manage that. So I think some of the emotional side of this is important to remember when we're designing these systems, because we often think about the more physical or tangible things, but that emotional side where you just don't want to, or you can't be bothered, or you feel like you're burdening others, they're real things too, and we need to be mindful of that when we're designing our systems. So I really like those comments. Thanks for those who shared those.
Yeah, great. They're great comments, and yeah, I'd like to sort of save them and actually put them in a document that we could share around, because we're getting everyone's thoughts on that from across the Pacifics, and I think it's really valuable to get everyone's insights on it. If you could just click on next there. So really the things that that I've got up there on the slide are all covered by what you've said in the chat, and you've gone much further than that as well. So yeah, as I said, we'll definitely try and capture that and make that useful in some way.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot then to think about in terms of developing a robust project GRM. We've got the different risks and the different activities of the project. We've got needing to make it accessible and inclusive. So, some of the things that we just discussed. This part of the session really goes through a number of, if you like, key elements of a grievance redress mechanism that someone setting up this kind of mechanism should consider. We'll run through these. There's a slide on each one there, and we'll go through it, and then we'll move to the case study session. So just to remind everyone, the key requirements of ESS 10, just have a look at those: proportionate, accessible, culturally appropriate, discreet, confidential, allows for anonymity, which is a really difficult word for me to pronounce for some reason, and needs to be prompt and effective in terms of resolution, and it keeps stakeholders informed, and the mechanism is disclosed so everyone knows about it. They're sort of the key requirements, and as I said, we'll run through these key elements now. So the first key element is getting a procedure developed, and a robust procedure needs to clearly outline how grievances will be received, and the processes that will take place in terms of how they will be resolved. Often you see procedures with multiple lodgement channels. They need to have clear steps and clear governance arrangements. So who will do what at each step within the project, and that doesn't just mean project staff, but it could be others that are contributing to the functioning of the GRM. The next one there, clear response and resolution timelines. So letting people know that once they submit a grievance, they should be hearing back from the project in this time period, and they should at least have an initial resolution proposal put to them within another time frame. Good GRMs and procedures also utilize existing mechanisms and traditional mechanisms. So, you might have mechanisms within government or also within communities that can be utilized. And finally, they need to be clear, transparent, and widely disclosed. So, you can put that on websites. That's one way of doing it. Typically, you're not going to reach most of your project affected peoples that way. You can also, to reach those people, you can do it through consultations, through flyers at the community level, and we'll discuss a little bit more about that soon.
Can I just add in this? For a simple project, this can be a really simple thing to design. For a really complex project with multiple responsibilities, it can be really complicated. And it can be hard to communicate that. So as an example, I'm working on a project where the government are responsible for land issues. So any grievances about land need to go to the government. But then you have a major contractor and you also have the subcontractor who is the major builder. And so it's just a lot of different places. And obviously we want that to be simplified and streamlined for people making the grievance. So you can sort of have a front-facing grievance, but it has to be then channeled to the right sort of people. And so it sounds easy, and often we have these fairly simple diagrams that look straightforward, but the process behind the scenes can be really quite hard. But it's really important that everybody's clear internally who goes, where things go, what is the internal procedure and what is the procedure for lodging. It can be difficult, but it's really worth thinking out up front.
Thanks, Rach. Okay, next one. The next key element of a good functioning GRM is to have the roles and responsibilities of people really clear. And to make sure that those people are trained. So, typically you've got a number of people that are involved in grievance management. You could have project staff, you could have, government staff, contractors, community representatives. So it's really important that those responsibilities are outlined in the various documents that specify those people's engagement. So if it's a contractor, that the contract outlines that. If it's a staff member, terms of references have that in there, and so forth. And so really making sure, especially for instance with the terms of references of people, position descriptions. I think it starts off. It gets it started off on the right foot if you can have these kinds of things clear in those descriptions, because otherwise, people have lots of other things to do. GRM is probably just one thing. Making it clear that they have a responsibility to implement it in some way, and what that is really important. And then also for training on those responsibilities is really important. And you can see there the picture. That's from the Rural Service Delivery Project in PNG. It's got heaps of staff involved in the project. I think over 100 people are involved in implementation of that project across 5 provinces. So they brought everyone in. I think these people are the community development workers and the technical facilitators that work in the communities, to train them on their roles and responsibilities in terms of implementing the grievance mechanism. I'll update the slide. Discrete. Was that the last one? I'll do that. Okay, I'm not really looking at the chat too much. I've got Afira and Rach to guide me there. Okay, next one. The next key element is about awareness raising. So we sort of touched on this briefly before when we talked about the procedure and making that available to everyone. But there's all different ways that you can raise awareness to different stakeholders about the grievance redress mechanism and how it works. And the most important points here is that, you know, there are all different types of stakeholders and project affected people and beneficiaries. And so you need to understand, you know, how best you can communicate with them, you know, sometimes in a culturally appropriate manner, to make sure that it's best for them, and also, as we discussed before, for vulnerable and disadvantaged groups. Some examples there. You got the website from before. There's a flyer there from a Tongan project. There's a contractor works notice board with numbers and contact details of people to contact there. You can see there's also a community notice board where flyers can be put up. Facebook, those kinds of things, but really below in the bottom right corner there, consultation and discussion is probably really the most valuable way that you can raise awareness about grievances. But I guess not everyone can get to those consultations, or you might not be able to, you know, to engage everyone. So having these different ways of raising awareness about the GRM is important. Just checking for time. We're going to 12:30, yeah? Or,
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the fourth one here is on lodgement channels, and we spoke a little bit about that before too. I mean, lodgement channels are really important. It's really important to make the GRM accessible to all the project affected people and all stakeholders. That said, the more lodgement channels that you create, the more complexity you create in the back end. So you as a project team need to manage all those different lodgement channels. So if you have a suggestion box, someone needs to keep on checking that. If you have a telephone line, someone needs to be able to direct the grievances to the right people when they come through. So it really is, it's important to make sure you've got a good number of channels that different ways in which people can access or raise grievances, but also think about the complexity and what's best for the project. Okay, so the fifth element is about recording and prioritizing and investigating and resolving grievances. And I think the first thing there, it's really important to have some kind of form, and that was mentioned in the introduction. I mean, most projects have a form where details can be recorded. But when a grievance comes in, I think a really important thing also is to be able to categorize and to prioritize. So, you know, some issues are quite, could be quite significant issues that need to be resolved and or need to be escalated to different people within the project team to make sure that they're dealt with in an appropriate way. And one example of that is a GBV or now GBV meaning gender-based violence. Now we sort of refer to this as sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment. So if a complaint of that nature was to come through, obviously, you know, it's quite a sensitive, it would be quite a sensitive complaint, and so it needs to be dealt with, you know, in a very sort of responsible and manner. So there'll be different channels where those types of complaints need to go, and the project needs to think about those things and how that's done early on. Also, it's important to be clear on how a project will acknowledge firstly, and investigate, and then provide feedback. Obviously, when you put in a complaint, you want to know that the project that you're making a complaint about has received it. You want to know what the next step and process is. So that acknowledgement is really important. And then in terms of, and that acknowledgement can outline how how the complaint might be investigated and who will be in contact. Also important at the back end to have those kinds of systems worked out within the team. You know, what happens? How do you investigate? How do you resolve certain, you know, different types of grievances that you're expecting may come in for the project? The sixth element here is on tracking and reporting. So we often talk about a grievance register and a filing system to keep track of these things, and also grievance reporting in progress reports. I think the key message here is that this also needs to be developed commensurate with, you know, with the project. If it's a project where you know, you're not expecting to receive a huge amount of grievances because the projects are quite small, targeted to specific areas, you know, maybe just, you know, an Excel spreadsheet, maybe just regular reporting with a table might be sufficient to keep track of these kinds of things. But if it's a larger type of project being implemented across a large geographical area with heaps of different project affected people, heaps of different actors, and there is the risk of, you know, a fair number of grievances coming in, well, then maybe that system of tracking and reporting needs to be more sophisticated. And the final element of a good functioning GRM is monitoring and evaluation. So at different points of the project, coming back and saying, is this mechanism working? Are there areas in which we can improve to make it work even better? So the example here is a bit of a checklist that's available to evaluate your GRM. There's pros and cons of that checklist. It could be useful, but there's also other ways of doing it, just by talking to different people that have used the GRM, talking to people that to other communities or project affected people about whether they know about it, about the GRM, trying to understand how it's functioning. And that can feed back into how you strengthen it. I think that's it with the key elements of a GRM. Are there sort of any questions or any comments, Rach? Any contributions there?
Look, nothing. I think you've covered it all, Tom. I think the thing to remember is start from something that you know works. So start from a process or a way of recording or gathering grievances that people already use. Every community has their own problem-solving mechanism. You know, we've been doing this for years. This is not sort of new. What we're doing is systematizing that's a bit new. So use processes that already exist, that people kind of already understand and are willing to use, and then add that, you know, start from that and add to it rather than trying to invent something completely new. So there's process here that we're sort of documenting, but there's already ways that this is happening. So I think it's really useful to tap into that to start with. Has anybody else got any comments or questions on this so far?
Tom and Rach, I know that we did a project here in Samoa for LTA funded by the World Bank, and there was a GRM database that was put in place by that was required by World Bank to be put in place at LTA. So that was really good in monitoring grievances that were lodged during their projects and seeing that they were closed off.
Yeah, that's a really good example. And I'm just trying to see if I've got that as a case study. I think we do actually have that project as a case study, so we can talk about that and whether
yes.
and whether that was fit for purpose, because I think we'll find that that project's moved on to something different now.
Yes, if Shauna from LT, well, she used to work for LTA, she was the one who was responsible for that. She could probably share about that if she's
Yeah.
on our, yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to a couple of case studies. I think we've got half an hour left, and we've got 3 types of case studies to present, and then to have a bit of discussion and question and answer on. So the first one, Rach is going to talk about.
Great, thanks, Tom. I'm not sure which screen you're seeing me from, but there's probably a lot of Rachel's on screen, which is
Both screens.
unpleasant for everybody. But thanks. Look, this is a case study from the Solomon Islands, and it's for a major infrastructure project. And the reason I thought this was an interesting one to share because it's anonymous. And this brings, you know, a different sort of set of challenges because you may not be able to contact the person who has raised the grievance. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what this grievance sort of was about and how it was resolved, because I guess the opening point is that you don't ignore anonymous grievances, and depending on the nature of the project, you may get them a bit, and it may come back to some of the issues that you raised, you know, when we wanted all your feedback, which was so excellent, and some of the family issues or some of the cultural issues of not sort of rocking the boat. It may be that people have something quite serious to share with you, but they choose to do it in this way because of other reasons where they're not really sure if they want to share their details with you. So it can be sort of quite complicated, and there's a couple of issues. So in this case, the claim that was made was around sort of the lack of planning and a suggestion that this was having implications for health and safety of the community. So the issues that were raised were quite, you know, had the potential to be quite significant. And we, you know, none of us want to cause harm on our projects. So hearing that people were concerned about safety is obviously a fairly big flag that, you know, is not something to be ignored. The other challenge here, and that I'm sure any of you who have dealt with this before will face, is that there wasn't a lot of detail in this complaint. So it's quite a good or big claim to make that there's health and safety issues, but without some specific details, it makes it harder to investigate. And I think this is quite normal, but when you put anonymous and, you know, a lack of detail, it becomes even more difficult for the project to do something about that because there's not necessarily much that can be investigated. So this project is also a very complex project where there's multiple parties involved. So we have a main contractor and a major subcontractor. The government are involved. There are multiple lenders. So it's a complex project, this one. And so it can be quite difficult for people to know where to go to and who internally should be dealing with this, particularly when there's probably a number of different people in this case. So you've got the main contractor and the subcontractor. Given that we don't know a lot of detail, you may be sharing it with a number of different people in terms of the procedure that you're working with. At this time, just to add a little bit more complexity, there was a transfer of responsibilities for managing grievances happening at the same time, which is also quite easy to allow things to fall through the cracks, especially when you've got an anonymous sort of grievance like this that doesn't have a lot of details. So it's a bit of a tricky one to sort of manage here. And you have the challenge of potentially limited engagement with the person who is making this complaint, as well as it causing a number of non-compliances that are the responsibility of a number of different people involved. But in this case, what we did have was an email. So this particular complaint came through by email. Now we can always correspond with an anonymous email address. So we may not know who we're dealing with, but there is opportunity to engage. And so there were further questions asked of this person via email. And that person has the choice or not as to whether they were able or willing to respond. It can be quite difficult for people. They may think that providing that detail will reveal themselves, and they're clearly making a very deliberate choice to be anonymous. But in this case, we did have that opportunity. You may not. It may be something that is in a Dropbox or that has been shared in a different way. So it may not always be possible to seek that additional information. And so what we did is we sought an investigation from multiple parties. So we went to the main contractor and to the subcontractor and asked some very specific questions about, you know, the claims that were made, and asked them to share information so that we had something more to go on. And that was useful because it highlighted some of the things that may not have been understood by other parties and all parties, but also gave a little bit of potential insight into the claims that were being made. And it's not possible for that to be perfect, but it is a useful process to go to. So you can seek information even if it's general. Please, though, remember that you need to respect who is sharing that information, as in if they may come back and say, we can't do anything with this. And that might be a fair response depending on the nature of the claims. So how do you close an anonymous grievance when it's not, you can't really check how the person may be satisfied with the response that's being made. And that's also, in this case, we had an email address, so we were able to directly respond, but you may not have that. So how do you do that? And in this case, we did share information, and really the factor was time. So allowing that individual plenty of time to come back and give information, suggest that your response wasn't good enough, checking in to make sure they received it, and then saying, we will give you another month, say, to respond to this, otherwise we will consider it closed. So giving people information so that they can make sort of informed decisions about how to proceed. If you don't have the opportunity to share information because you don't have an email address in this case, you may choose to post a notice up to say, this is what we've done as a result of this anonymous grievance. Keeping, you know, be mindful of confidential information, of course, but saying we've made these changes, or we can't investigate unless you give us more information. You know, we really will respect your privacy. Please share with us. But allowing the rest of the community or this individual to recognize that you are trying to address the issues that they have raised. So it's not that you don't reply at all. It's just you need to find another way to share some information through other parties, through the notice board, through your website, through sharing in community meetings to say, we've received this is what we're doing. So you still can share information. But also just a final point on this, that confidentiality through the whole grievance process is hugely important. We talked a little bit about recording grievances. Probably not everybody should have access to that information. Yeah. Again, to go back to the points you raised about family or people being nervous, it's confidential, and we need to respect that. In some cases, there may be retaliation if that becomes clear. So, you know, it's really important that you have ways of managing and recognizing this so that retaliation to the person who is raising that grievance doesn't actually take place. So there is a lot of respect necessary that's part of this process. So I'll stop there. Is there anything you want to add on that, or Anonymous?
No, I mean, there's a question from Joshua in there. This grievance was directed to the bank through the World Bank's redress system. So the question you see there is that how should this work, and is the developer or the government, the client, involved? How did they get involved?
Yeah, so that's correct. So in this case, I'm describing something that has come through to the bank directly. And as Tom mentioned, we have a separate grievance process. Now, I wanted to raise this example though, because I think the process is still relevant, even at the project level. So when it does come through to lenders though, we do go back and we ask for further information from the people who have the knowledge of doing this. As a bank, we're not implementing people. We're not at the forefront of this, so we need to seek information. Now, that is the same as you. Whoever is responsible for managing the grievance process, you may not be the road engineer, or you may not be the community liaison officer, or you may not be the person, in fact, you won't be the person responsible. So you need to seek further information. And that's always a number of different ways that can go that will be unique to the grievance and will be unique to the project. So it's certainly important to get the story from multiple players. Obviously, grievances can come in and they are the perspective of the person raising the grievance. There are multiple perspectives in every story, and we want to make sure that we capture those multiple perspectives before we're responding, because we want to make sure that we understand the problem fully and that we have all the information to hand to share that response. So it doesn't matter whether that's the bank getting involved because it's come to us directly, or if it's because you as the grievance person are unable to have every bit of information to hand as well. It's always great to get as much information as you can before you're deciding how to resolve this grievance. So Joshua, I hope that answers your question. Maybe a thumbs up, or if you have another question, feel free to open your mic and ask that. Sorry to put you on the spot. I don't mean to do that, but it's a good question. Thanks,
Or you can give a thumbs down.
You can give a thumbs down, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. We've got acknowledgement in the chat. Thanks,
Thanks,
Joshua. Any other questions on this one?
Has anyone had any experience of anonymous complaints before? Look, I would say that it's not that common, but the reason I wanted to raise it here is because it's very easy to think that you can't do anything about this, and I wanted to demonstrate that it's still a grievance, it still gives you information, you can still go through the process, but you might have to adjust because you can't engage directly.
Tom and Rachel, Talbina asks, what if it's a gender-related issue? No email address to respond to, and you can't post the response on website? Like
a gender violence-related issue?
Yeah, it sounds like that.
Sounds like it.
That's a really tricky one. So particularly if it's a very, very sensitive topic, as you know, it will be when it's about gender-based violence or any kind of sexual harassment or abuse. It's really difficult, and it's sort of a slightly separate topic, but the first thing to think of in that case is the survivor. What do they need? And so the first thing we would like when those kinds of complaints come through is for people to get information to go to a specialist that can give them some that help and support. It could be health, it could be counselling, it could be justice or sort of police intervention. And it's really very difficult to do that if you can't get in touch with them directly. So a thing that maybe you would be able to do is just make sure that that information is available if they're on a website or coming to your project site, wherever you think you are sharing information, maybe make sure that information is available. So even though you can't provide it directly, that you may be supporting that individual to get access to information that might be helpful for them. But it is a very difficult one in that case, but that's probably my suggestion.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I think that's the way that you'd definitely approach it.
We have a comment here from Margaret. GBV grievances are hard to come by if works have limited working hours and without on-site camping, and the use of code of conduct to minimize these grievances.
Yeah, so that's right. The aim is to try and avoid issues happening, before, so that they don't become grievances and complaints. So if you can make sure that the different types of risk mitigation measures are put in place and are implemented properly, then you can hopefully avoid many of these types of grievances, or at least avoid the number that you're getting or the significance of them. So yeah, you can have those types of things. Campsite management, good training of workers on these issues and on their responsibilities under the code of conduct, done by like people that know what they're doing, people from the GBVs working in the GBV sector that can engage with these the workforce on these issues, and we've done a lot of work in the last year and a half, 2 years on this, and making sure that those kinds of measures are really fit for the project's purpose, and they're talking about the kinds of issues that could arise and need to be managed for that project, construction type projects, as opposed to sort of the broader gender-based violence issues that might be experienced in the community.
Tom, yes, just adding on to that question raised by Talbina. For us here in Samoa, we have NGOs that facilitate GBV, cases. So maybe that's something that Talbina can also look in what they have in place in their island. For us here, it's the Samoa Victim Support Group, and that's been very effective in dealing with GBV cases here in Samoa. We have a question here from Baltasare Rongo. In a case where the grievance negotiation reaches deadlock for some reason and drags on far too long than the normal redress period, what do we do to close off the grievance?
Go. All right, I'll start, you jump in. That's a really good question. And I think this is where your procedures and your internal process comes in, because it's not possible, or it may not be possible, to resolve absolutely every grievance to the satisfaction of the person making that grievance. But you still go through the process, and I think it's really important to be clear about what you're doing through that process, how you're gathering information, and it's perfectly acceptable for the complainant not to agree with you or to be fully satisfied. So I think the process is very important, and documenting that is important, and documenting that together with the complainant so that you're recording and understanding each other's perspective on this. But also, there may be other avenues, for example, for that individual to use. So just say they're making a claim about land, and you as a project have done everything you can to demonstrate why you have come to a particular conclusion. They still may be able to go through the court process in whatever country you're in. That is still a process that is accessible to them. So I think recognizing the fact that it might take time, that if you know that the person is not satisfied, recognize that, and then give them information about the steps that are available outside the project grievance mechanism, because the existence of the GRM doesn't mean that other avenues are not available. So they may choose to go down the legal route if they want to. There are often other ways of resolving this that are outside this exact process, but this should be the place to start. Anything else?
No, nothing to add.
We have a comment here from Andrea Tora. She's sharing this. The World Bank Tonga office is in the process of getting our Women in Crisis Center to be an alternative GRM focal point for GBV, SCA, SH incidents, and to implement awareness on this new addition to the existing law.
Yeah, that's thanks for sharing that, Andrea. That's great. And I think something similar in Samoa. I know that the Ministry of Women is involved there in in the implementation of this work on projects there. And so yeah, I think projects are actively seeking these types of organisations that are in country, that are experienced, that have the knowledge and experience to help projects deal with these types of issues, both in terms of implementing the mitigation measures or avoidance measures, if you like, and then helping in dealing with the response if issues do arise. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Tom and Rachel, we have a question here. Does the GRM keep complainants' information, including their identity, confidential, and how do they come about to solve it? I think we've covered this before.
Yeah, I think perhaps we can move on because it's nearing sort of the end of the session. Perhaps I'll just present the next case studies, and I'm not controlling the screen, I forgot. trying to go to the next slide when I'm looking. Okay, so yeah, the next one is on a road rehabilitation project, the Samoan Climate Resilience and Transportation Project. And we have a few people today that are involved in that project. I see Roini's online and someone else from LTA, is it
LPC?
Okay,
LPC.
right. Yeah, I haven't met you, but you might be involved in other sort of GRM for other projects that LTA is implementing. I think this is. I wanted to raise this as an example of how this GRM has been established and what sort of what the key features are of this GRM and what the challenges and opportunities are for this project. I guess the key point here is that it's a road project. So it's a linear infrastructure, and the infrastructure that's being put in benefits the broader public, but it also has adverse impacts on the nearby communities. So it also has multiple activities. It's not just one project. It has a number of different infrastructure projects at different stages. Some like looking to be constructed and implemented, others that are just more feasibility and design and so forth. And then beyond that, legislation type activities, training activities that are being done by other implementing agencies. So it's got multiple implementing agencies. It's got 4, in fact. LTA is one of them, but it also has the MNRE, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Finance, and where also the Ministry of Works, Transportation and Infrastructure, where ENI is from on the call today. The key features of this mechanism, it tries to coordinate between those. It has government avenues, so you can raise grievances with any of those implementing agencies directly, but it also has supervision consultants on those projects that are being implemented, and obviously contractors. And each of those actors have responsibilities for receiving and resolving grievances. It has done lots of site-specific awareness of the GRM. So I know LTA has been really involved in engaging all the communities along the roads for the West Coast Road Project, and raising awareness through these consultations, but also they have a flyer, they have stuff on their website as well. They had a web-based register, which Afira, you talked about before, and they were using this quite a complex system, but actually it's a bit of a lesson for this project. In the end, we had a number of meetings about this. It was quite complex to use, and what was decided was that a more streamlined register could be could be done an Excel spreadsheet that could be made into like a shared document that the different implementing agencies could access and register grievances. It also has that GBV response part. So as I mentioned before, the Ministry of Women's involved in that, and the implementing agencies help coordinate that with their assistance. Just looking at my notes here. So I think the other sort of important point on a road project is that there's different types of grievances at different stages. For the West Coast Road, the LTA, the Land Transport Authority, was implementing the resettlement plan, the abbreviated resettlement plan, and it involves some minor land take and some impacts on economic assets. And so LTA implemented that ARAP, and they also implemented a grievance redress mechanism. And we could see that it was working because LTA was reporting in their regular reports or in their ARAP completion reports that these kinds of grievances had been received and how they'd been resolved. I think as the project moves into construction, it's just started construction now, the role of grievance redress management falls on more actors. So you have the design and supervision consultants and the contractor, plus the LTA that are also administrating this. So the LTA will receive reports. Well, the design and supervision consultant will receive reports from the contractor on the grievances and how they were addressed by the contractor, and also the LTA can get involved as well. So there's a number of systems that have been put in place to manage how grievances are received and tracked, I guess, if you like. The other point, we're running out of time, aren't we? Yeah. So the other point here that I wanted to make was, there's another sub project, the Alava feasibility study, and that's at a completely different stage of the project cycle. It's right at the start. No decision's been made on whether this road will be upgraded or not. It's a feasibility study. Whereas, the West Coast Road example I explained before is right into construction. So obviously you're going to receive a lot of, you may receive different types of grievances and mainly about just getting information about what's happening, what's being proposed, what the process is in terms of feasibility, what decisions will be made when and where. So that link to stakeholder engagement and communication about what's happening is really important, but also understanding how you don't have the structures in place to receive grievances at the community level like you do perhaps when you're implementing a construction project, and you need to think about how you do that. So this project's been doing that as well, which has been really interesting. Roini or others, anything you'd like to add on this?
Roini, are you there? Topisi, I see Topisi online.
Okay, so I guess, if you've got anything to add, guys, just put in the chat line. I think I might skip the next example, or just go through it very quickly. You've got 5-10 minutes. Okay.
We can go on till 4 here. So it's okay.
Okay, I think it's probably important because it's a different type of project. We've spoken about 2 infrastructure projects, but the World Bank finances many different types of projects, and this one's a community-driven development project in PNG called the Rural Service Delivery Project, and I think we have a number of people that are involved with that project online. If you want to just put up your hand or say hi in the chat, and maybe put some of your observations in there as I go through. It's really different to an infrastructure project, and particularly, hi Samuel. Yeah, it's really different to an infrastructure project. This project is really small scale community infrastructure, really, micro scale, if you like, that the community has the whole process is about the community prioritizing and making a decision about what types of infrastructure, community infrastructure they would need in that community, and then applying for a grant to do that. This one's implemented across 5 provinces. There's hundreds of different wards. I think Samuel could correct me, but I think, over 400 different wards that are involved in this process of going through and collaboratively working out what they need, and then making an application for a grant. The other interesting thing here is that it's competitive. So not all grants that are made will be approved. There's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. So you might have a community that gets a grant to do a small community water supply project, whereas another community that went through the same process was unsuccessful and misses out. So there's this whole issue about real or perceived inequity. There's the winners and losers thing. People could get upset about that, so there's a risk of community unrest. So in addition to really good communication and stakeholder engagement and making sure that the community-driven development process is done properly, having a good functioning grievance redress mechanism is really important to catch those kinds of complaints and grievances early on and make sure that you can the project can manage them effectively. So the key features of this, there's multiple levels. There's from the community right up to national levels, and each of those levels, there's project staff and government staff that are involved in the implementation. So getting that. Getting the roles and responsibilities and training those people is really important. Awareness is really important, and the CED approach, the community-driven development approach, allows for that. There's lots of engagements with the community, consultations. There's also ways in which information can be shared during those consultations. The project set up a MIS system because they could receive a lot of grievances. They have an MIS system to track all the process of the community-driven development exercise, and they've utilised that to also have the grievance redress mechanism. So that's still under development, but we're hoping that the people that are implementing the project on the ground, they have tablets and they can enter in information about grievances on their tablets, and it flows through the system. And there's various ways in which that information is protected, but also gets to the right people. I see Samuel, you've got your hand raised. Would you like to come in? Samuel?
Might have been from LA.
Thanks. No, that was that was the last hand that I raised.
Okay. Sorry, Samuel.
Sorry about that.
So Samuel's the monitoring and evaluation specialist on the project, and he's been really involved in this work. Challenges and opportunities. Raising awareness about the DRM has been challenging, even though the project has a community-driven development approach, and the project's working on how they can do that better through their consultations, through the establishment of the village notice boards, the different types of flyers that, and those types of things that can be put up to make sure that people are aware of it. Utilising the traditional village mechanisms is a really key thing. The project does that. It sets up community committees, and training those community committees on how to receive and process grievances is also important and something that the project's working on. I put this example out there, or this case study, because it is really different to a road project. It can be really, it is sort of a lot more complex, and it has required a different response in terms of how the GRM has been established. It's still a bit of a work in progress. I'm sure Samuel will agree with me there, but I think the project's coming a long way, and as it starts to as these small-scale community infrastructure projects start to roll out, we hope to have this grievance mechanism working really well to try and avoid or manage issues better during that period. Thank you. Samuel, anything you'd like to add?
No, you've basically covered just essentially where we are. So thank you. Nothing to me.
Thanks, Samuel. I'll just show you one thing of this project. This is from the project operations manual, and it just shows you how this project has outlined the different roles and responsibilities for people in terms of grievance redress management. So you start from the ward and community. You've got the the subcommittees. You've got the ward development committee. Then it goes to the local government level. So you've got a number of staff there that are involved in the project and their roles. Next page, Rach. Then you've got province, and at the provincial level, you've got coordinators. You've got these rural infrastructure and safeguards specialists, and they play a key role. And then at the national level, you've got the project management unit as well, and different people within that. So it's really, there's lots of people involved in this project. It's found it necessary to really outline those roles and responsibilities to make sure that everyone knew what, who was doing what, and ensure that this system could run effectively. Okay, so there's a number of things coming in the chat line, I guess, or
mostly just the one. A question about PPAP and any lessons learned. Do you want to? Have you got anything, or we could get back to Simon on that separately?
PPAP. Well, PPAP, yeah. PPAP, it's closed project now, and there's a new project, PACD, the Productive Agriculture Commercialization Project, and it basically is doing the same things as PPAP. I think, and they're setting up their grievance mechanisms now. I think the lesson there is sort of similar to RSDP. You've got you've got lots of different partnerships working with lots of different farmers to deliver better productivity outcomes in cocoa and coffee. And you've got two project management units, and you've got a project coordination unit centrally. And I think that one of the main lessons there was that one project management unit was sort of more experienced and more set up in terms of their grievance redress mechanism. The other project management unit was less so. And there was lots of opportunities there for those two PMUs to work together on making those systems, strengthening those systems. And that wasn't really done during, well, it was done a little bit towards the end of the PPAP, and now that's being done a lot at the start of this new project. The project also the new project has hired a environmental and social specialist in the PCU at that level to help coordinate that kind of thing and make sure that the grievance redress mechanisms for both the PMUs are strong and functioning, and those lessons and sharings are happening, and there's some more coordination on grievances.
last slide. Tips.
Yeah, so we've come to the end. Thanks everyone for participating today. Rach wrote these top tips. So I'm going to pass, I put in my notes Rachel's top tips. So I thought put Rachel on the spot and get her to start at least closing this out with the top tips of today's discussion.
Thanks, John. So, you know, I think we've covered all of these off, and they probably won't be new to you, but I do think it's useful just to reflect a little bit on the key things that we sort of want to do to make this work well. And it's, as I said earlier, it's really starting with what stakeholders are already doing, because you're tapping into the processes and the natural ways that this stuff is already happening. So be mindful of that. That's how you're going to make it culturally relevant. You're going to be understand the issues that you all told us about as to barriers to this, and you'll be able to you know, address those from a design perspective. Have your grievance in place early. I think it's really crucial, particularly with land or particularly with construction. Make sure people understand it before you start doing things. That way you can respond in a timely way and really correct right from the outset, rather than to wait for that to come much later. Roles and responsibilities are really crucial when you have really complex projects, and we've had some great suggestions in the chat about committees or ways to do this. You need to make sure that people understand their role in this, so what they have to provide, the time frame, who they report to, how they get back to people. This is the behind the scenes stuff that may not be visible to the people making the complaints, but it's really important for the projects to sort of have thought about. Confidentiality is really important here as well. Don't share your database with everybody. Make sure it maybe has a password that only a few people have. Be aware and respectful of the information that people are sharing with you. It's not designed to be out there in public. Meeting your deadlines is really important. If you respond to a grievance and say, we'll get back to you in 7 days, but it's really difficult and complex, or there's reasons why you can't get everything you need, get back to that person and just remind them that we're really sorry it's taken longer, we need another 7 days. Keeping that dialogue open is really important to help them feel like they're being heard and for them to understand the process that you're going through. I think recording grievances is really fundamental, and I've seen projects that have told me, oh no, we've had loads of just little tiny ones, but we didn't even bother recording them. I respect that. It's a bit of an administrative process, but it also doesn't allow you to see grievances in sort of a wider picture. So sometimes you might have lots of little grievances just asking questions. If you see that there's lots of those and you realize you're not providing the information that people need, and maybe you could update your flyer or your website or have a meeting to help people. So it is important to record them, even if they're quite sort of straightforward. It helps you understand what's useful for the people in your community or that are affected by your projects. Make sure you're designing for the most vulnerable, because then you're designing for everybody. So when we think about literacy or language or internet connectivity, you know, think about all those things up front and make kind of good choices for the people who are the ones that will be find it the most difficult to come to you and share their problems. So then it just makes it easier for everybody when we're doing that. And remember, finally, if you're not getting grievances, something isn't working. It doesn't mean you're amazing and your project is perfect. It's really easy to think that, and I'm sure everyone's doing a great job, but getting a good few grievances that are about fairly minor issues, that is the sweet spot of grievance mechanisms, because it means that things are working and you have evidence of that. If you're not getting anything, it's probably a problem with the way that you're asking people to get in touch with you, because, you know, this stuff is difficult. There's always going to be problems. So make sure that if you're not getting anything, have another think, have another look, ask people about it so that you are able to adapt and design as necessary. Thank you. That's all my top tips, but we are getting, I am mindful of time, but we are getting a few other comments in the system, or another one from Wendy.
There's, one about the code of conduct, and definitely we can share that. definitely that's for community-driven development projects, and that's the PNG one's adapted from a Myanmar project, so definitely can share that.
Yeah, Wendy, and to everybody, we put all our presentations up on the PNEA website, so we can always add that to the same site so that it should be available under this session. Thanks.
Well, I think that's about it. No more questions on our chat box. Tom, do you have any final remarks?
No final remarks other than to say thank you for everyone for participating today. It's been really good to have so many people from all across the Pacific. Hopefully today's presentation was useful. I know that you'll probably have more questions after we finish today, so feel free to contact Afira to get in touch with Rach and I. We're always happy to answer any questions and provide information where we can, and also other members of our team. So with that, thanks everyone for participating, and back to you, Afira.
Rach, anything else you'd like to add?
Nothing, just to say thank you, everybody, for joining. As usual, it's a really great opportunity to all kind of share and discuss, and I really appreciate the feedback and comments in the chat, and the really excellent questions that you've raised today. So thanks very much, and thanks to Tom for driving this session today.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Tom and Rach, and thanks everyone for joining us today. A big thank you to our trainers. We have learned a lot, and just getting in feedback from our participants here, they're very appreciative and very thankful for this presentation. It's been very helpful and informative. And so we would like to thank you so much for your time and your valuable time. We appreciate that, and we look forward to many more opportunities to be able to be trained by you both. And also a big thank you to our participants for joining us today. We would also like to give a big thank you to all our sponsors from the PLP-ESS partners, the World Bank, USB, SPREP, and ADB, without which we would not be having these training opportunities. And so we are all very thankful for that. And so with that, just some final reminders again to our participants. Our next session is next week on Module 24, next Wednesday, and that will be on management information systems to support EIA and safeguard management in the Pacific. And we're still continuing on with the SPREP knowledge portals. This is another very interesting session, and it will be on invasive species, battler resource base, the Pacific Island Protected Area portal, the Pacific Climate Change portal, and the SPREP's virtual library. So we will have a few presenters for this module, and do not miss out on this session. It's going to be another very useful session for all of us. And also remember to visit your PNEA portal for the training materials and the video upload. If you missed the presentation because of any internet connections, go back and you can watch those parts which you missed. Also, please remember to fill in your online evaluation survey. And I note that we've had over 60 participants today. Some have been sharing one Zoom link, the team from the Solomon Water Authority. Thank you guys for that. Please do remember to send your email addresses to me, and I will send you the online survey link to fill in. But apart from that, another big thank you to all of us that have joined our session today. I look forward to seeing you next week. And with that, have a great remaining of the day, and see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.